Have you ever wondered what kind of species chooses to rebuild the ruins left by its own mistakes? Not for glory, not for forgiveness, but because walking away would hurt more. After the Haven 6 collapse, the stars went silent. Every report called it a tragedy. Every survivor called it justice. No one volunteered to return, except one man. Dorian Vale, engineer, widower, exile. He came with no weapons, only tools. And beneath the frozen oceans of a dead world, he would find something the galaxy had forgotten. A life still waiting to be healed. They called him naive. But maybe that's the secret of humanity. When logic says, leave it broken, we kneel, we bleed, and we fix it anyway. Because somewhere deep inside, we believe the act of mending might just be our purpose. Before we begin, subscribe, like, and tell me from which city or planet you're watching this. This story explores one of humanity's greatest paradoxes: why fixing matters more than forgetting. The frozen sea of Haven 6 cracked beneath Dorian Vale's boots as he descended into the dark. Water dripped somewhere in the collapsed tunnels ahead. His helmet light cut through the murk, catching on twisted metal and shattered ice. He could hear his own breathing, steady and mechanical. The only sound besides the groan of unstable structure around him. Then he saw it. A shadow, tall and impossibly still, watching him from behind a column of frozen bioluminescent coral. "You shouldn't be here," a voice said. "Not human." The words seemed to ripple through the water-heavy air like a bell underwater. Dorian stopped. His hand moved to the tool belt at his waist, then dropped. Not a weapon, just a wrench. He'd left his weapons behind 7 years ago. "Neither should you," he replied quietly. The shadow moved into the light. She was tall, perhaps 7 feet, with skin that seemed to glow faintly blue even in the darkness. Her eyes were silver, pupilless, and they fixed on him with something between fear and fury. Veins of light traced patterns beneath her translucent skin, flickering amber. Dorian's heads-up display flickered to life, reading data from his scanner. Irrath biological profile appeared in small text at the corner of his vision. Resonance capability. Molecular manipulation via harmonic frequencies. Threat level 4. Monitored. The file listed them as extinct. Population 0. The woman in front of him was very much alive. "The report said everyone was gone," Dorian said, keeping his voice level. His helmet display showed his mission parameters: Reconciliation Program Protocol 7 Alpha. All reconstruction teams operate under non-military jurisdiction. Use of force prohibited. "They were," she said. Her voice carried harmonics that made his chest vibrate. "I remain." She stepped closer, and the water on the ground began to ripple in ways that defied physics. Rising, circling his boots. "My name is Dorian Vale," he said, not moving. "I'm a civilian engineer. I came to rebuild what was broken here." Rebuild. The words seemed to echo strangely. The water rose higher, to his knees now. "You destroyed Haven 6. Why would you rebuild it?" Dorian thought of New Perth Station, the way it had twisted apart like paper when the microfractures finally gave way. 1,847 people. His wife. His daughter. He hadn't been there. He'd been working in another sector. Sometimes he wished he hadn't been. "Because," he said slowly, "fixing is harder than breaking. That's why it matters." The water stopped rising. The woman tilted her head, studying him with those strange silver eyes. "You are strange," she said finally. "Most humans who come here bring weapons. You bring only tools." "I'm not most humans," Dorian said. He looked around at the shattered habitat. The walls were covered in what looked like growth patterns, organic architecture that seemed to have been alive once. Beautiful. Now dead. "What happened here?" he asked. The woman's veins flashed red for just a moment. "Your people happened. Haven 6 incident report. Classified. Atmospheric processors destabilized. 100% native casualty rate. Except they missed one." She turned away, fading back into the shadows. "My name is Lyraean," she said from the darkness. "I am the last Ireth of Haven 6, and you are not welcome here." But she didn't kill him, and she didn't leave. Dorian stood alone in the flooded tunnel, his helmet light painting circles on the walls. Above him, the ice groaned. Systems flickered in the deep. Somewhere far above, Dr. Kamara Singh's voice crackled over his comm, tinny and distant. "Vale, you're rebuilding ghosts. Come home before you become one." He switched off the comm. In the darkness, he could hear something else, a sound like singing, distant and mournful, resonating through the water and metal and ice. The sound of someone who had survived the unsurvivable, and wasn't sure if that was mercy or cruelty. Dorian Vale unpacked his tools and got to work. The habitat code on his display read H6RST42. Haven's Rest, he thought. Let's see if we can make that true. He didn't see Lyraean for 3 days after that. But every morning, he found that small repairs had been made overnight. Cables spliced, supports reinforced. Someone was helping, even if she wouldn't show herself. On the 4th day, a generator exploded. Dorian was thrown back by the blast, and when he came to, he was pinned under a fallen beam, water rising fast around him. He tried to push it off, but his ribs screamed. The water was at his chin. He was going to drown in a tomb he'd been trying to rebuild. Then he heard singing. The water stopped moving, started to solidify around him, holding him up, holding him safe. The beam lifted as if made of foam, moved by invisible hands. Lyraean stood over him, her veins blazing green, her hands weaving patterns in the air that made reality bend. When the beam was clear, she stopped singing, looked down at him with those expressionless silver eyes. "Why did you help me?" Dorian gasped. She was quiet for a long moment. "Because you didn't come to kill what's broken," she said finally. "You came to fix it." Then she was gone again, fading into the shadows. Dorian lay on the cold floor, breathing hard, and realized something had changed. He wasn't alone anymore. Neither was she. The habitat groaned around them, and in the distance, systems began to flicker back to life. One small light at a time. Personal log. Dorian Vale. Day 47. She watches me like I'm a ghost. Maybe I am. He recorded the log while working on a corroded junction box, his scarred hands moving with practiced efficiency. The work was meditative. Disconnect. Strip. Reconnect. Make broken things whole again. If only everything could be fixed, this simply. Lyraean emerged from the lower levels carrying something that glowed faintly. Some kind of algae, he realized. She placed it carefully in a cleared area, arranging it with the precision of ritual. "What is that?" Dorian asked. "Food," she said. "The water here still grows it. One of the few things that survived." She didn't look at him when she spoke. They'd been working in parallel for weeks now, always at a distance, like two planets in adjacent orbits that never quite touched. Dorian opened his ration pack. The sealed container hissed. Freeze-dried protein paste. He'd eaten thousands of these. They all tasted like nothing. On impulse, he moved to the cleared area and sat down across from her. Lyraean's veins flashed amber, uncertainty, but she didn't move away. They ate in silence. The only sound was the drip of water and the distant hum of generators struggling back to life. After a while, Lyrian reached out and touched the space between them. Her finger traced a symbol in the frost. Kainvora, she said softly. It means, build together. An old word. We had no use for it anymore. Dorian looked at the symbol. He'd get it tattooed on his hand later, he decided. If he survived this, if there was a later. Thank you, he said, for saving me the other day. Lyrian's head tilted in that distinctly non-human way. You are first human to say that word, she said, and mean it. They went back to work after that. But something had shifted. When Dorian struggled with a panel that required 3 hands, Lyran appeared beside him without a word and held it steady. When she tried to lift a beam too heavy even for her resonance-enhanced strength, Dorian was there with a jack. Kainvora, he thought. Build together. That night, he accessed the recovered fragments of the Ireth cultural database. The text was barely readable, corrupted by years of neglect. But he found an entry that made his breath catch. Sankarath, the last singer. One who survives to witness ending. The entry had been marked by Lyrian herself. She believed this was her role, to be the last, to sing the funeral song for her entire species. Dorian closed the file. His hands were shaking. He remembered New Perth Station. The official inquiry had been clear. Structural failure due to undetected microfractures. 1,847 casualties. No criminal negligence found. An accident. Just an accident. Just like Haven 6 had been an accident, according to the official reports. Atmospheric processors destabilized due to... and the rest was redacted. Data expunged. Convenient. Dorian had worn that uniform once, had trusted those reports, had believed his people were better than that. He didn't believe it anymore. A message came through from Dr. Singh. Her face appeared on his heads-up display, concerned and frustrated. Vale, you're rebuilding ghosts. Come home before you become one. I can't, he said quietly. Not yet. You've been there for months, Dorian. The psychological evaluations are concerning. You're showing signs of... He cut the transmission. Behind him, Lyrian's voice drifted from somewhere in the habitat. She was singing to the walls again. That mournful, resonant sound that seemed to make the very structure weep. He'd asked her once what the song was. It is the sound of my people dying, she'd said. You call this beautiful? He'd felt like he'd been gutted. I'm sorry. I didn't know. She'd looked at him for a long time then. You couldn't, she'd said finally. But you asked. That is new. Now, listening to her sing in the darkness, Dorian understood. She wasn't just mourning. She was remembering, keeping them alive the only way she could. He picked up his tools and went to find her. Found her in what must have been a gathering space once, now half collapsed. She was standing in front of a wall covered in names, hundreds of them, written in flowing script that glowed faintly even now. My people, Lyrian said without turning. I write their names, so they are not forgotten. Dorian stood beside her in silence. Then, carefully, he picked up a piece of broken light pipe and began to repair the panel above the names, making sure the glow would last, making sure they would be remembered. Lyrian watched him work. Her veins pulsed blue, a color he'd never seen before. He didn't know what it meant, but he thought maybe it was something close to hope. Dorian found the file buried in a corrupted data cache. Military After-Action Report, declassified 2611. His hands stopped moving as he read. Operation Tidebreak. Sabotage of Haven 6. Atmospheric systems successful. Native resistance neutralized. Not an accident. Never an accident. He heard movement behind him, turned to find Lirayan reading over his shoulder, her silver eyes fixed on the screen. Her veins blazed red. "You knew," she said, voice tight as a wire. "No, Liar!" The water erupted. It came from everywhere at once, flooding the chamber in seconds. Dorian tried to swim, but invisible currents grabbed him, pulled him under. His lungs screamed. He could see Lirayan above him, hands raised, face twisted in fury and grief. He didn't fight, just let himself sink. Maybe she was right. Maybe he deserved this. The water stopped, pulled back like a retreating tide. Dorian collapsed on the floor, coughing, and looked up to see Lyran staring at her own hands as if they belonged to someone else. "Did you kill my people?" she asked, voice breaking. "No," Dorian said hoarsely, "but I wore the same uniform. Does that make me guilty?" "I don't know," Lirayan said. "Does it?" He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Just pulled himself to his feet and went back to work. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the tools, but he kept going, kept fixing. Because that was all he knew how to do anymore. Lirayan watched him for a long moment. Then, without a word, she picked up a welding torch and began working on the opposite wall. They didn't speak for 3 days. On the 4th day, the habitat shook. A deep, grinding rumble that made the walls scream. Seismic activity registered on Dorian's scanner. Magnitude 6.7. Structural integrity compromised. Evacuation recommended. There was nowhere to evacuate to. They worked side by side, racing against the tremors. Dorian welded supports while Lirayan sang, her voice creating standing waves in the water that held collapsing sections in place just long enough for him to brace them. His improvised alloy, 60% human steel and 40% ireth bioresin, held where pure metal would have failed. Symbiosis required, he noted. Neither material worked alone. When the shaking finally stopped, they collapsed against each other, exhausted. Dorian's hands were bleeding from chemical burns where the ireth enzymes in the water had eaten through his gloves. Lirayan's veins were dim, her skin more opaque than before. An unauthorized biometric scan had warned him. Cellular degradation detected, estimated lifespan remaining 14 to 18 months. She was burning herself out to save this place. "Why?" he asked. "Why are you doing this?" "Because it is all I have left." "Why are you?" Dorian thought of New Perth, of hands too small to hold properly, of a smile he'd never see again. "Same reason," he said. That night, he did something he hadn't done in 7 years. He played music, an old file from his archive, something his wife had loved. John Coltrane, A Love Supreme. The saxophone filled the empty halls, echoing off walls that had never heard human music before. Lirayan appeared in the doorway, head tilted in confusion. Then something changed in her face. Her veins flickered through colors he'd never seen, complex patterns that seemed to express things language couldn't touch. "What is this?" she asked. "This pain that is not pain?" "We call it melancholy," Dorian said. "It's when you miss something you never had." "Your species is broken," Lirayan said, but there was no accusation in it now, just wonder. "Why do you treasure this breaking?" "Because it reminds us we can still feel." Lirayan sat down beside him. After a long moment, she began to hum, her voice weaving around the saxophone in harmonics that shouldn't have been possible. The sound created aurora patterns in the water-heavy air, light dancing where there should only be darkness. Two broken things, making something beautiful together. Later, Dorian found Lirayan in the ruined sanctuary. She was holding a human welding tool, turning it over in her hands like it was something precious. "Show me," she said. So he did. Showed her how to fuse metal, how to shape it with heat and pressure. She was clumsy at first, but she learned quickly. And then she began to sing while she worked, and the metal responded to her voice in ways it never would for Dorian. Flowed like water, held like stone. "We are both mourners," Lirayan said softly as they worked. "Building tombs for the living." "Maybe," Dorian said, "but we're building together. That's gotta count for something." Lirayan's veins pulsed blue again. "That color that might be hope." "Kaenvora," she said. "Kaenvora," he agreed. The sanctuary was finished. For the first time in 7 years, Dorian allowed himself to feel something close to satisfaction. The fusion of human steel and Ireth bioarchitecture had created something neither species could have made alone. Light filtered through the ice above, painting everything in shades of blue and gold. Lirayan stood at the center, singing. Not the morning songs anymore. Something different. A resonance pattern that Dorian's translator couldn't quite capture, but his heart understood. "Hold. Do not break. We are still here." Then the alarms screamed. The main reactor cascade was failing. Years of neglect, weeks of patchwork repairs, finally giving way all at once. Dorian's display flashed red. Critical failure imminent. Hull breach in 4 minutes. "This is not a drill." "We have to go," Lirayan said, veins flashing amber. "The manual pressure valves," Dorian said, already running. "I can seal the compartments, contain the breach." "The access corridor floods when sealed," Lirayan said, following him. "You'll drown." "Finish the sanctuary," Dorian said. "That's the only thing that matters." He didn't wait for her response. Dropped down the maintenance shaft, his scarred hands finding holds by muscle memory. The corridor was already ankle-deep in freezing water. He could hear the shriek of failing containment, the groan of metal about to give way. 4 valves. Each required 200 rotations to close. His hands were already bleeding before he finished the first one. The water was rising fast, 10 centimeters per second. Mathematical certainty. He wouldn't make it out. 3rd valve. His ribs screamed. Something had torn inside. He could taste copper. 4th valve. Corroded. Wouldn't turn. Dorian put his whole body into it, using himself as a lever. Something in his chest cracked audibly, white-hot pain that made his vision blur. The valve moved, locked into place. The safety door slammed shut, sealing him in. Protocol. He was trapped. Water at his chest. 60 seconds. Then Lirayan was there, on the other side of the transparent barrier. She must have swum through a collapsed duct, something that should have killed her. Her hands pressed against the glass, veins blazing red. "Go!" Dorian shouted. "Save yourself!" She began to sing. Not to open the door. That was impossible. The song was for him, for the water. Frequency modulation, creating standing waves in H2O molecules. His scanner reported uselessly. The water around Dorian began to crystallize, forming a matrix that held him suspended. Let him breathe through it like some impossible amber. Lirayan's veins began to dim, started at the base of her hands, spreading up her arms like lights going out. Her translucent skin turned opaque, aging decades in seconds. The crystalline filaments of her hair shattered, floating away like snow. But she didn't stop singing. Light flooded the chamber. Every bioluminescent panel in Haven 6 activated at once, responding to her final resonance. In the crystal, Dorian saw things he shouldn't see. Memories. Lirayan as a child, swimming with others of her kind in waters that still lived. Lirayan alone in the dark, counting days that became years. Lyraean seeing him for the first time, thinking he was death come at last. And she saw him. New Perth Station, a baby in his arms, her eyes the same color as her mother's. The smile he'd give anything to see one more time. The guilt that had hollowed him out and left nothing but the need to build, to fix, to somehow make the math work out differently. They felt each other's pain and chose to bear it together. The system stabilized. The water stopped rising. Haven 6 held. Lyraean collapsed. But the crystal remained, keeping Dorian alive in a tomb of frozen light. Dr. Kamara Singh arrived 6 hours later with a rescue team. She found Lyraean sitting beside the crystal matrix, singing softly. Her voice was barely a whisper now, fragile and human thin. He stayed, Lyraean said when Singh approached. I stay. Singh looked at the readings on her scanner, looked at what these two had built together, looked at the sanctuary glowing in the distance, light pulsing in a pattern her translator identified as Morse code, Kayan Vora, build together. For the first time in her 20-year career, Dr. Kamara Singh cried. The Galactic Witness Network had already picked up the energy signature. Unidentified resonance pattern detected on Haven 6, pattern consistent with Ireth signature. Impossible. The feeds went viral within hours. Human sacrificed self to save lone alien. Alien sacrificed future to save human. In the Reconciliation Review Board, an emergency session convened. If enemies can become this, what are we? Analysis of the crystal matrix revealed something unprecedented. Human DNA interwoven with Ireth resonance patterns. They'd created, literally, a new form of symbiotic life. Other species could replicate it, the scientists said. But it required absolute trust. Trust between species that had tried to destroy each other. The council debate lasted hours. When it ended, the decision was unanimous. Motion to posthumously reinstate Vale's credentials. Approved. Motion to declare Haven 6 a protected site. Approved. Motion to expand the reconciliation program. Approved. In the crystal, Dorian Vale dreamed of songs he'd never heard and waters he'd never swim. And waited. Lyraean sat beside him and sang. Still human, she whispered in Ireth. Still here. The sanctuary pulsed with light above them. A promise made in metal and stone and song. If you're hearing this, Dorian's final automated transmission played on repeat. Remember, fixing is harder than breaking. That's why it matters. 6 months later, the crystal dissolved. The medical team had monitored it constantly, watching as Dorian's body slowly healed in the impossible stasis Lyraean's song had created. When his eyes finally opened, the first thing he saw was her. Lyraean was asleep in a chair beside him, her hand resting near his. Her skin was permanently opaque now, her veins barely visible. She looked older, frailer. The price she'd paid was written in every line of her transformed body. You stayed, Dorian said, voice rough from disuse. Lyraean's eyes opened. Silver, still silver, even if dimmer than before. You stayed first, she said. She helped him walk to the sanctuary. It took an hour to cover a distance that should have taken 5 minutes. Every step hurt. His ribs had healed crooked. His hands would never grip quite right again. But he was alive, and so was she, and so was Haven 6. The habitat hummed around them, systems running clean and stable. In his absence, teams from a dozen species had arrived to help complete the work. The reconciliation program had expanded beyond anything Dr. Singh had imagined. Haven 6 was the first protected site. There would be others, but that wasn't what made Dorian stop and stare. In the center of the sanctuary stood two statues carved by hands he didn't know. A human holding a wrench, an ireth with hands raised in song. The inscription was written in both languages. We built peace with our hands. The council voted to make this a memorial. Larayan said quietly, they wanted to honor what we did. What we did, Dorian repeated. Sounds better than what I did. Kaenvora, Larayan said, always. They sat together in the sanctuary as the light filtered down through the ice, painting everything in shades of hope. Larayan told him about the planetary healing initiative she'd founded. Dozens of worlds were being restored now, not by military force or political mandate, but by people who believed fixing was harder than breaking, and that's what made it matter. The Ireth Council contacted me, Larayan said after a while. The survivors from other colonies. They said this place is a graveyard. They want me to let it rest. What did you tell them? Dorian asked. I told them it was a graveyard, Larayan said. Now it is a cradle. I will not abandon hope. Her veins pulsed that faint blue that meant possibility. They said I've become contaminated, too human. And? I said, if caring for those who destroyed us is contamination, then I choose infection. Dorian laughed, and it hurt his ribs, but it was worth it. He hadn't laughed like that since before New Perth, since before he'd forgotten how to be anything but broken. You know what's funny? He said. I came here to fix a habitat, but I think maybe you fixed me. No, Larayan said. We fixed each other. That is how it works. A message came through on Dorian's rebuilt comm system. Dr. Singh, checking in as she did every day now. She'd become one of the initiative's loudest advocates, lobbying the council for more funding, more resources, more second chances. Other messages, too. Engineers volunteering, diplomats asking advice, scientists wanting to study the crystal matrix they'd created. A dozen species tentatively reaching out to each other, asking the same question. If they can do it, why can't we? In the years that followed, Dorian and Larayan would rebuild 17 more worlds together. The Ireth Historical Archive would record their work under a new designation, Kaenvora, the human who sang without voice. Dorian Vale, first builder of peace, but that was later. That was legacy. For now, they sat in the sanctuary and watched the light change. Two people who had every reason to hate each other, who had chosen something else instead, something harder, something that mattered. Do you think it'll last? Dorian asked. All of this, the peace we're building. I don't know, Larayan said honestly, but we're going to build it anyway, because the alternative is unacceptable. She reached out, and Dorian took her hand. Human skin scarred and rough. Ireth skin translucent and strange. Both warm, both alive. Above them, the sanctuary's light pulsed steady as a heartbeat. Below them, Haven 6 hummed with the sound of systems that would run for centuries, built to last by people who understood that destruction was easy and creation was hard. In the distance, Dorian could hear new voices, the next team arriving. More builders, more healers, more people choosing to fix rather than break. The work would never be finished. There would always be something broken that needed mending, but that was all right. That was the point. Ready to show them how it's done? Larayan asked. Dorian looked at his scarred hands, at the tools hanging on his belt, at the habitat they'd saved together, at the woman who'd tried to kill him once and had instead taught him how to live again. Yeah, he said, let's build something. And in the heart of Haven 6, where two enemies had become family, the light burned steady. Fixing is harder than breaking. That's why it matters. Maybe the lesson was never about rebuilding walls or cities, but learning that every act of repair is an act of faith. In a universe built on conquest, humanity taught that fixing what's broken is the purest form of courage, because to rebuild after ruin is to declare that creation still matters, even when no one is watching. What does it mean to rebuild something you didn't destroy? Forgiveness or survival? Would you risk everything to fix what others chose to break? When every species learns how to destroy, who will teach them how to build again? If this story reached you, write the word rebuild in the comments to show you stayed until the end. Tell me where on Earth or which world you're watching from. Subscribe if you believe stories like this remind us what we're still capable of. Like, share, and click on the final card to keep exploring what it means to be human among the stars.